hemisphere are connected by a broad tract of fibers called the corpus callosum. So the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, and it's in the forebrain. So, and it is divided into two, the right and the left hemisphere, by many folds or convolutions, and these convolutions are connected by what we call the corpus callosum. Now, the hemisphere is made up of the outer layer of gray matter and the cerebral cortex, and the inner layer of white matter. Each cerebral hemisphere is divided into 4 distinct lobes, which we have the frontal, parietal, the temporal, and the occipital. The frontal, the parietal, the temporal, and the occipital lobe. So you can see the frontal lobe, that's the portion that has the bluish color. We have the parietal lobe having the brown color. We have the temporal lobe. Okay, the parietal lobe has a wine color, the temporal lobe has the brown color, and the occipital lobe is the one that has the lemon color. Inside each hemisphere is the thalamus. That is, inside the right and the left hemisphere we have the thalamus, and beneath the thalamus is what we have a structure called the hypothalamus. Below and in front of the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland, which is partly controlled by the hypothalamus, and the pineal body is above the thalamus. This is just describing the forebrain, the location of structures in the forebrain, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the various parts of the forebrain. Now, the midbrain. The midbrain is the one that links the forebrain to the hindbrain. It's the narrow portion. It serves as a pathway to nerve fibers leading to and from areas where impulses are received, such as the optic thalami, that's the plural for thalamus, the hindbrain, and the spinal cord. The midbrain also controls auditory and visual reflexes, that is, it controls sound reflex and sight reflexes, such as the constriction of the pupil of the eye when you pass from a dark place to a light place. For instance, you're being injured all day and you don't have so much light, everywhere is cool, and you're now going to the sunlight, the midday sunlight. You know, there's a way your eyes will feel. So the midbrain is the one that controls the constriction of your pupil in that case, and also it's the one that helps you to focus your eye on close objects. So that's another function of the midbrain. Now, the hindbrain, which is the rear part of the brain, it consists of 3 parts: the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The cerebellum is located behind and beneath the cerebrum. You know, cerebrum is in the forebrain, but cerebellum now is at the hindbrain. The surface of the cerebellum consists of gray matter, making up the cerebellar cortex and a central mass of white matter. The pons, that's the second part of the hindbrain, is located beneath the midbrain and opposite the cerebellum. It connects the right and the left regions of the cerebrum. That's what the pons does. It connects the left side and the right side of the cerebellum together. Then the third one is the medulla oblongata. It joins the cerebellum to the spinal cord. So we said the cerebellum is at the back, at the hindbrain, but what medulla oblongata does is that it connects the cerebellum to the spinal cord. Then the spinal cord expands from the medulla oblongata to the tail. So the medulla oblongata is the one that joins the cerebellum to the spinal cord. Then the spinal cord expands from the medulla oblongata to the tail, and the spinal cord is protected by the bones of the vertebral column. So you can see that from this diagram. You see that cerebellum is at the back, the lower part. Then you see the green structure being the medulla oblongata. Then you can see the pituitary gland. Then above it we have the hypothalamus. So, and the cerebrum is the pinkish part. You can see that that's the largest part of the brain. So that is just the diagram and what I've just illustrated for you. Now we move on to talk about the functions of the parts of the brain. We're mentioning various parts. You know, I mentioned the parts, but now I want to talk into details the functions of this part. And the first is the cerebrum. Cerebrum note is in the forebrain, while cerebellum is one that is in the hindbrain. So we'll talk about the cerebrum first. The cerebrum controls all the body's voluntary actions and consciousness. So you are thinking, I want to read my book. That's the cerebellum that is doing that for you. Is one that controls what you do, your voluntary action, what you do voluntarily. Okay, I want to stroll out. Oh, I want to go and carry this water. I want to do that. I want to do that. So cerebrum controls all the body's voluntary action. Then it is the center of reasoning ability. It's the center of your will, learning, memory, and acquired skill. So cerebrum is the one that controls your reasoning ability, your will, what you want to do, your memory, and your acquired skills. Things that you learn is the center for that. Then the cerebral hemisphere have particular functions. You know, I mentioned that the cerebral hemisphere, the cerebrum is divided into four. It has four hemispheres: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. So the frontal lobe is the seat of intelligence, memory, imagination, thoughts, judgment, emotional reactions, and movement of skeletal muscles, while the parietal lobe receives and interprets the sensation of pressure, temperature, and position. The temporal lobe is concerned with hearing. It's concerned with your memory and understanding of speech. Then the occipital lobe controls vision, interpretation of objects that are seen. So those are the functions of this cerebral hemisphere. Now, the next part of the brain that we're talking about its function is the thalamus. The thalamus relays and directs sensory and motor impulses to and from the cerebrum. So it relays and directs sensory and motor impulses to the cerebrum and from the cerebrum. And such we have sense of receptors for vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. Then the thalamus is also the seat of consciousness and awareness, which distinguishes a man from the rest of animals. Thalamus is also the one that serves as a connection between the forebrain and the hindbrain. The next part of the brain that I'm talking about its function is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls the reaction of the body to stress and strong emotion. Hypothalamus regulates the body temperature, regulates its appetite, sleepiness, sexual behavior, endocrine activity, and maintains homeostasis. That is, hypothalamus controls water in the blood, so it maintains balance and regulates your behavior, sexual behavior, body temperature, your behavior to food, that is appetite, your behavior to sleep. So that is what hypothalamus does. Then the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is the one that controls the center for endocrine system. You know, when we were talking about the pituitary gland the other time, I mentioned that it is the master gland because it controls all the other activities of the body. So it controls all the other endocrine system. Then the pineal body. The function of the pineal body is not clearly understood. Then the olfactory lobe. The olfactory lobe receives sensory impulse of smell from the nose. That's what the olfactory lobe does. It receives sensory impulse, so you can smell, you can perceive that what is smelling is the olfactory lobe that is functioning in that area. Then the optic lobe receives sensory impulse from the eye. It is the site of vision or light, so it receives impulse from the eye. The cerebellum. Cerebellum is the one that is located at the hindbrain. It regulates and coordinates action of muscles such as walking, sitting, talking. So cerebellum is the one that controls that and it coordinates the actions of your muscles. A damage to the cerebellum results in slow, jerky, and unconditioned limb or uncoordinated limb movements, slurred and unclear speech, because all the muscular activities are not being controlled anymore. They are not under the control when the cerebellum is damaged. So the person that has the cerebellum damage will be having a slow, jerky, uncoordinated limb movement because the muscular activities are not under control, and the person might be termed as an imbecile. Now, the medulla oblongata. It serves as a passage of impulses between the spinal cord and the rest of the brain. You know, it's the link between the brain and the spinal cord. So it passes impulse between the spinal cord and the brain. Also, it coordinates involuntary and reflex actions of internal organs. Involuntary actions are those actions that you don't think of before you just discover that it has happened. So it's the medulla oblongata that coordinates that. And such we have breathing. You know, you don't think of breathing. You are not acting breathing. You are not say, I want to breathe now, except when you are doing a deliberate breathing. But normally, even when you are sleeping, you are breathing. It's something that is involuntary. Just do it. Respiration, heartbeat. The way your heart is beating, you can't control it. It's just beating. And when it stops beating, it just stops. You can't control that. Then constriction and dilation of blood vessels, so as to regulate blood pressure. You don't control that too. So damage or injury to the medulla oblongata may result in an instant death because of the vital role it plays. You know, it's the one coordinating heartbeat, and when the heartbeat stops, that's just the end. Controls breathing and respiration. So by the time there is damage to the medulla oblongata, it might result in instant death. Now we move on to the second part of the central nervous system, and that is the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a continuation of the medulla oblongata. You know, I said medulla oblongata is the one that joins the brain to the spinal cord. So a continuation of the medulla oblongata, and it is partially divided by a shallow dorsal feature and a deeper ventral fissure. In cross section, it has an outer region of white matter that surrounds a roughly H-shaped inner region of grey matter. The white matter contains nerve fiber, while the grey matter contains the nerve cell bodies. In the center of the spinal cord is a narrow canal filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Longitudinally, that is when you dissect the spinal cord this way,